Hi, I'm Ashley Hanna, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Missouri. So the project started out as a proposal for a monument to honor westward expansion. The mayor of St. Louis proposed this idea in 1933, and this became known as the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial. They wanted to honor Thomas Jefferson for his role in westward expansion, as well as the explorers Lewis and Clark. Now, because this project required about $20 million from the government, there was a lot of resistance because people felt that since it was during the Great Depression, people felt that the money could be used for something more practical. However, there was a lot of promise for new jobs with this project, so it started gaining a little bit more support. It was chosen next to the Mississippi River because the Mississippi River played a significant role in westward expansion as well. And since St. Louis has kind of a historical aspect, this had to be preserved during this project. In order to get the best results possible for this project, they held an architectural design competition. Here are some of the requirements for this competition. It had to be a memorial to Thomas Jefferson. It had to preserve the old St. Louis city, which included some of the landscaping, as well as rehabilitating some of the buildings, and some of the recreation as well had to be preserved. There had to be a museum that told the history of westward expansion. It had to represent Thomas Jefferson's vision for greater opportunity for all people, and had to have three specific transportation considerations, which included a parking garage or parking lot, had to have a relocation of the railroad that went through the location, and then had to also implement a highway. In 1947, the architect Eero Saarinen was the winner of the competition. He had a team of a landscape architect, a sculpturist, and a painter. With his team, they were able to come up with a design that was kind of modeled after the catenary curve. And Eero actually won this competition over his father, who had also entered and was an architect as well. So the equation of this curve is given by the equation on the slides. And the curve is one that would be created by a chain hanging freely between two supported points. Now this would be in the case of an ideal curve. The equation would change based on the weight distribution along the chain. So this one is given specifically by one that would have a uniform weight across. The architect was often inspired by just basic geometric shapes and then would just make adjustments as he went based on what he found more visually appealing. So this was the case for the arch that he designed. As you can see, the equations here are a lot more complicated than the original catenary curve equation. He originally designed it with a 20 to 21 aspect ratio, with the base width from the outside edges of each of the legs being 630 feet, and then a height of 590 originally. However, by the time construction actually came about, he had readjusted the design to be 630 feet high as well, making it a 1-to-1 ratio. The legs were designed with an equilateral triangular shape and were decreasing in cross-section as it approached the top. And this was to create less of a load in the center of that arch. And he was often criticized for creating this imperfect catenary shape because they called it impure math, and basically said it didn't do justice to just basic math. As all architects should, Saarinen consulted structural engineer Fred Severud to make sure that his design was actually feasible. So the arch was designed from stainless steel legs shaped in equilateral triangles. The ones closest to the base were 54 feet in length, and the ones closest to the top of the arch were 17 feet in length. These equilateral triangles were then stacked and welded together both on the inside and outside. The steel was used in kind of a double-walled fashion, with the spacing at the bottom being about 3 feet and then closer to the top about 7 inches. And the spacing was then filled with reinforced concrete. The reinforcement used was pre-stressed bars. Close at the top where they couldn't have spacing, like the wall spacing, they used steel stiffeners for reinforcement. And then the exterior was covered with stainless steel and the interior was covered with carbon steel. And this image physically breaks down like all of the different components that built up those legs. And so at the time, there wasn't any like formal structural design manual or guide for like welds, but there was specified on the blueprints. There it was type 304 austenitic steel, which is known to be like it's preferred for its weldability. And it was ordered to an ASTM A167, which actually is no longer in production today. This chart next to, so the chart shown here on the slides is what the specifications would be today. The arch was finished in construction in 1965. So the design guide didn't become available until 1968, and the arch actually paved way for some of the standards that were created for stainless steel structures specifically. Some extra considerations. So because this monument does actually carry people inside, people can ride a tram to the top, it had to be subjected to serviceability standards and safety regulations for having people inside. It has trams that carry the people up to the observation deck, going up both sides of the legs. And it's also equipped with emergency stairs and elevators in each leg. And it does snow in St. Louis, so it had to be designed for snow loads and wind loads. And the wind loads, it can resist up to 150 miles per hour winds. And then it's also earthquake resistant with a sway allowance of 18 inches, which while it's unrealistic for it to actually reach 18 inches, it does have the capability to sway that much. And also the skin that's made out of stainless steel was selected specifically because stainless steel has a higher resistance for corrosion. So as far as construction goes, as I mentioned earlier, the design was approved in 1947, but the construction didn't actually start until 1959. And this was partially due to some issues with the land and permits because there was historical value to some of the surrounding areas. The foundation was completed in 1961 and then full construction began in 1963. There were some delays due to civil rights protests. As I mentioned, this was a big project for job opportunities, and there was a lot of protests regarding racial discrimination when it came to these jobs, as well as to subcontracting. Construction was complete in 1965, and then it was open to the public, but it became fully open to tourists and visitors in 1967. And the memorial aspect of it was finalized in 1976. So here's a time lapse of the arch being constructed. And basically they used a process of prefabricated stainless steel sections that were 12 feet long, and that consisted of the equilateral triangles that were welded together, as well as the concrete, the reinforced concrete. And so they combined these sections, lifted them up with cranes and derricks. And then as you can see, toward the completion of the top of the arch, they used a scissor truss to hold the legs in place as they allowed that top of the arch to connect. As you can see, it's quite a remarkable building. It has paved the way in the sense of using stainless steel in a structural sense. And even in the symbolic way, it holds a lot of meaning to the city of St. Louis. It wasn't on the map, or it was a dying economy, and it helped to reboost it. It brings thousands of visitors every day, every year. And it's quite the tourist attraction. It also attracts skydivers and people seeking thrills, even though they're not allowed and generally need specific permission in order to, for example, air shows always need to get specific permission from the government, are often denied to be able to fly through the arch. Anyone that's skydiving has to get permission to be able to go through the arch. But there have been several people charged who have broken the law that have done it. So it's quite the attraction, both like historically and just for visual appeal. I thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.